Want to know what the movers and shakers of New Hampshire's performing arts are thinking? Welcome to New Hampshire Unscripted with your host, Ray Dudley.
This is Ray Dudley, Artistic Director for Square Peg Productions. And this episode is part one of a two-part talk that I had with Gina Carballo and Justin Voshell of the New Hampshire Theatre Alliance. In this first part, Gina talks about her early years with the NHTA and from the time it was at the Palace all the way up until they moved it over to the Capitol Center for the Arts. She talks about being the awards girl and moving up to a committee member, to a board member, to vice president, and then to president. And then Gina and Justin talk about how the board changed, and with it, how the focus of the NHTA was to take the attention away from the NHTA itself and onto the participating members. They talk about bringing in Brian Halperin and how he was instrumental in that change. Then they talk about how the move to the Capitol Center for the Arts made the NHTA more central to the groups and gave it more gravitas. Then they talk about the adjudication process and the true impact it has. And here's a hint, it's not just to score performances. And then finally, they talk about how they're morphing into an advocacy group and what they're doing about productions that don't quite fit the adjudication process. This is a fantastic discussion, especially since it's only part one. Wait till you hear the whole thing.
So, the NHTA. You want to talk about that, right? I'm sure that's why you're here.
I think so.
Yeah?
Well, we've been listening to your podcast.
Yeah, thanks. There's one.
We love it. The one. No. And we just noticed that it was something that kind of kept coming up a little bit in some of the guests that you've had. And so we thought maybe we should reach out and talk about it.
I didn't rain on it, right? I tried to keep it.
No,
yeah.
we thought you were incredibly positive.
Yeah, thanks. Well, we love it. Matter of fact, my wife was just telling me the other day how much she loved it again. I said, I'm having you guys in. She said, oh, man, it's just such a great time, and it's really bad that we hadn't been able to get to it the past couple of years because of my scheduling. So she was really glad you guys were going to come in and talk. So where do we want to go? Where do we want to start? You want to go to the beginning? You want to go with what you do for it? Or
Yeah, I think it might be nice to give your listeners an opportunity to maybe that may not be as familiar with the NHTA, a little bit of like the backstory and maybe sort of how we got involved and how the organization has changed over the years since we've been involved and kind of thinking about the direction that it's heading in now.
Yeah.
And I think that are you still planning to speak with Patrick O'Mara?
I am, if I can get him on, yeah.
Amazing. So I think that he can sort of take you into this like new direction that they're going in, but we can probably take you right out.
Good. I'm so glad because I had some questions about like, has it peaked? Where's it going to go in the future? What do you see down there?
We can talk about it in theory, and he can talk about it in practice.
Okay. Before it wasn't always called the New Hampshire Theatre Alliance, was it? Because I always thought of it as the New Hampshire Theatre Awards. And then someone corrected me recently and said, no, it's the Alliance.
Get with the program.
I know. And I'm like, what? An alliance? This is like a Star Wars thing. Where'd this come from? So
I like that.
Go ahead and blurb out about wherever that came out. Start wherever you want.
Do you want to give a history of your...
Sure. So up until very recently, it has been the New Hampshire Theatre Awards. And I've been involved with it since January of 2006. It's been a long time.
That is a long time. For some reason, I thought less than 4 years. But go ahead, 2006.
So I started as... I ended up getting involved because I had a lot of friends that I had met through theater that were involved with the production in some way. And they used to, back in the day, have this position that was called like the awards girl. And we don't...
Is that like the ring girl who comes out with in the...
Exactly what it's like.
So now that we're a bit more...
No bikini. But...
now that we're a bit more...
Not anymore.
Yeah, now that we're a bit more woke as an organization, we don't do that. But we used to. So that's how I started out. I would just get dressed up every year. I would show up at the Palace Theater, hand people awards, escort them off stage, and it was fun. It was exciting, and I wanted to learn more about it, just the inner workings of how you get to that night on stage. So I ended up volunteering on the operations committee. There was a time or a long portion of the organization history where it functioned as an operations committee. So it was volunteers that would come in and they would just work for a whole year on creating this production. And then after a few years, they wanted to become a nonprofit. So they actually incorporated, they did all the paperwork, they had a board of directors that they founded, and then it became kind of like a split organization where there was a board of directors and operations committee. And it functioned like that for a long time. So I stayed on the operations committee for a few years and then eventually got invited to participate on the board. Did that for about 2 years, ended up getting voted into an officer position as vice president, and then from there, president. So I've literally like climbed the NHTA ladder.
So before it was a nonprofit, what was it? Was it for profit? Was it just a group of people getting together and put on a show?
It was for profit, but we didn't actually make a profit. So we were founded through New Hampshire Magazine, and they had a partnership.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. The co-founders were Rick Broussard, who's the editor of New Hampshire Magazine, and Maddie Gregg, and they came up with this idea together and went out, solicited folks for help, had a great first production, and then decided to just keep it going. So in a lot of ways, it was very informal in that way. It just kind of happened, and then folks liked it and wanted to keep it going.
So the reason to become a nonprofit, was that a financial decision? Because
I think so.
you can get grants maybe or funding?
Yep, exactly. And I think at the time that was happening, they had primarily been performing the awards show at the Palace Theater. But the Palace Theater, this is back before I was really involved in the operations of everything that was happening. But it just seemed like there was a way to make more money in order to do more as an organization. And I think at the time, folks that didn't necessarily know like what that was or what that was going to be, but wanted to have the opportunity to do that. So they felt that they needed to kind of take back ownership in a lot of the financial aspects of putting on the show that the Palace kind of was just doing for us through partnership with New Hampshire Magazine. So when we ended up leaving the Palace and going to the Stockbridge Theater, we were there for about 3 years. And that's really when I started to get involved. And that's when the transition to a board happened, just about a year before that. So it was really just kind of taking ownership over this whole production and establishing ourselves as an actual nonprofit.
Yeah, I came on board when it was at the Stockbridge. I never got to attend when it was at the Palace, and I don't have an explanation for why. So my timeline came in later, and it was a wonderful event there. The school is beautiful.
Their facility is incredible.
Yes, yeah. It was freaking cold every time I went. And you got to walk they almost have to bus you to the front door from the parking lot.
Yeah,
so I was really glad.
Sometimes,
yeah, I was really glad they moved it to the Capitol Center. But so you decided to become a nonprofit. You moved to the Stockbridge, and is it you and still Rick and Maggie at that point? Who's on board at that point?
Yeah, so Rick's been involved since the inception, and so was Maddie. Maddie Gregg. Yeah. So he was president at the time, but he was living in California. So it was kind of an interesting dynamic because he, as the co-founder, he just had all this cachet. He was amazing at what he did. He's such like an idea person, and people really loved what he was doing, and they loved the idea of everything that he was doing. But it was hard because, he's got this really great energy, and he and Rick are just this like interesting pair in how they work together. But I think it was difficult with him just being across the country.
Yeah, logistically it had to be tough.
Very tough. And
Phone calls are like 4 hours apart, so
Oh yeah, yeah. Timing of meetings was always interesting.
He was sort of growing in the ranks at Apple too, so I think he was getting
kidding. Oh, that's an interesting side note.
Silicon Valley guy, and we were up here in the woods in New Hampshire.
Yeah, the backcountry.
So as they were thinking about sort of what was going to happen with leadership for the organization, as Maddie was getting sort of more involved in his life in California, as he should be, who would take on that task. And I think I'm almost 100% certain that I was not the first person that the board had in mind. I'm pretty sure, she'll hate me for saying this, but I'm pretty sure it was Katie Collins. Katie was on the board at the time.
Oh, she's going to hear this too. You know she will.
Yes. Yeah. I'm almost certain that she was approached first because she's amazing and wonderful, and she's this incredible powerhouse of a person, just so smart. But for whatever reason, I ended up getting approached by both Maddie and Rick, and I said yes, and I don't regret it. I mean, it's been an incredible 4 years running the organization. I think that it was a good time for me to do it because we had grown up a lot at the Stockbridge. We're very fortunate that Matt Cahoon allowed the Theater Awards to be there. He put this fantastic contract for us together. He gave us such a great deal for 3 years. We could just be there at the same cost for 3 years and really grow into ourselves as an organization and have some stability financially that we didn't have at the Palace that would enable us to do more. And I was really excited about that, and I was excited about where we could go from there. And I had a vision of where I thought we could go. It was a little bit scary because I didn't actually know if we could do it, but I wanted the opportunity, so I took it.
So the management, there's parallel tracks here, right? So management is evolving.
Yep.
The show itself is evolving.
Yeah.
I know that by the time I came on board, by the time I saw it, I had already heard stories about things that happened in the past and how the show itself, we're going to call it a show, a ceremony. Yeah. I don't want to denigrate it.
We'll call it a show.
All right.
We'll call it a show.
It is a show to someone like myself, because I would go to it even if there was no award part of it. It's become, for my wife and I, it's become that much of an entertainment night out. So the show itself now was evolving. Now, are you aware that the show's evolving, or are you part of that evolution as well as while the management is changing and you're like, we got to drive this thing somewhere, it has to go.
Exactly. It happens simultaneously. So I think that once I sort of stepped into my role, there were a few things that I wanted to see happen. Structurally, the way that the organization was running, there were some changes to it that I thought could be beneficial. Mm-hmm. And so I'll talk very briefly about that. But I didn't think the two system of having an operations committee and a board made sense at the time. There was a lot of people on the operations committee doing a lot of work, but they kind of answered to this higher power, which felt very, elitist and wrong.
So you were anti-board at the time?
No, I liked the function of the board, but I wanted people who were working hard in the operations committee to have a stronger voice.
Got you.
So I dissolved the operations committee and just invited all those people onto the board. I just felt that they needed to have a voice and voting power and a real stake in the work that they were doing.
So the board went from how many to how many?
Board went from about 8 to 9 consistent people that were coming all the time to almost 12 to 15 people.
Okay.
There were some people who left during that transition.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
And so it was
left because of disagreement of view, or just
I think with a volunteer organization, you do your time, and then if there's someone that has a different vision and it's not your passion project, maybe you say, okay, go for it. And so when Gina stepped up, I got the sense, sort of as an outsider, that that wasn't the only sort of big sort of change happening.
Yeah, you say as an outsider. Where were you at this point?
Gina took the president position. I want to say it was in September.
It was March. So we have an annual meeting every year that
yeah.
usually happens in March or April, depending on the year.
The previous September, we had just moved in together. So we had just become a serious couple.
So there's 3 tracks running for you.
It was a very interesting time in my life. And I think part of why I said yes to taking on such a big position in the organization was that I had left New Hampshire and I had moved to Cambridge in September. And I was afraid of losing a part of the community that had been a part of my life for so long, even though I was very excited to be moving to a bigger city and with a person that I loved and starting this new life with him. There was this part of this community here that I didn't want to let go of. And I thought that this could be a really meaningful way for me to stay involved because I wasn't ready to just let it all go. And I think that's been good for me in a lot of ways. It's allowed me to stay connected, and it's allowed me to watch people that I performed with for years grow and do these amazing things and still be a part of it in some way.
So it gives you some roots, still here. Now you're down in Massachusetts now, still, right?
Yeah.
Cambridge, still?
Yes.
Okay. It's a long way to commute just to keep your finger in the pie here.
It is.
Is that a challenge? We'll come back to the organization itself, but again, it's a logistic thing. I mean, Cambridge isn't exactly the backyard here.
We have a 15,000-mile-a-year lease on our truck. And that was a mistake.
Yeah.
It should have been a 40,000.
Yes, that's what I was getting at.
It comes in waves, to be perfectly honest. There are times where we're down here a lot, almost every weekend, and then there's times where we're not down here as much, or up here, as much. So it's finding a balance.
Yeah.
Certainly in the height of all the award show planning, we're down here. Why do I keep saying down here? Because I live in Massachusetts. We're up here all the time. And I don't mind it. Do you? Is it a lot?
I get the sense that, there are quite...
You don't want to fight now. So if we find out he does not like this is not good.
Oh, we never fight.
This is not Dr. Phil.
We never fight.
That's
we have
great
one,
to know.
Merged mind.
Like the Borg. Just assimilated.
Exactly. No, there are quite a few people who commute to the Boston area from New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And we commute to New Hampshire from the Boston area.
Yeah.
Right? We commute to this community from where we're living, where we have to live for our jobs. And so I think, as odd as it sounds, it makes sense for us.
So that's a pretty good level of commitment. I'm guessing that just after the award ceremony, the award show, things drop off. It gets a little more peaceful. Then it ramps up. So you're busy time because you have to go back into planning and redoing all that's going to happen next year.
I would say that there's a piece of the story that's worth talking about.
Yes.
Which is sort of Gina's leadership of a transition that happened. That because of what happened, there's quite a bit of work to do outside of the awards show now. And this is sort of part and parcel of the name change to the Theater Alliance. And that's really, I think, worth talking about a little bit. I don't want to change tacks.
I'm here for you. No, whatever.
Absolutely.
I wanted to get into the name anyway. The Alliance is a very specific word, and I've been really thinking about that. I mean, somebody chose that as opposed to like group or hangout or something. So Alliance is very specific. So if you want to go in that direction, I'm fine.
So I want...
So it happened in stages. The first stage was the show itself and sort of that metamorphosis of what it had been for a really long time and how it changed.
Actually matured in a way, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was kind of a playground-ish kind of thing where everybody got together, but then they morphed to mature is not a good word.
I would say that when I first started dating Gina, one of the
way back when
that came with dating Gina was the New Hampshire Theater Awards, right? Because she was very involved, right? And at the time, actually, where we had met is I was a board member of Theater Carballo. So I was a friend of the Cahoons and was working with them in Derry. And Gina was an actor with them. And we were sort of interested in, should we get involved in this thing, this Theater Awards thing? And I didn't know anything about it. And I remember really vividly the first time going to the Theater Awards at the Stockbridge. I think that as an outsider, it was an interesting night. I think that there was a community around the Theater Awards itself that was almost a little bit separate than the statewide theater community. Right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the production was references to the NHTA itself, or sort of jokes about the Theater Awards itself, or
an insider kind of thing.
It was a little more of an insider kind of thing. Yeah. And I think it was effective and entertaining and funny and had value for folks who had all that backstory, right? Who had been on the ride. But as an outsider who, we have our theater company, we like our work, we want to see if we can get some more attention or help be represented here. It was a difficult thing to understand. How would you join this? And I think when Gina and I, when she first decided that she might want to lead the organization, some of the feedback I had was that I wondered if it was sustainable as a 10, 20, 30-year-old organization that was sort of internally focused looking in. And so I think that was a starting point for a lot of what's been changed, was not even seeing that as a problem, but just saying, if you wanted to address that aspect, what would you do? Right?
So that's an interesting position to be in, because you're looking at it as you see some potential in what this could be, and yet at the same time you're not sure you actually want to even
be a part of it.
Right, and on a whole nother level, you're not even sure that if you brought up the potential, then anybody would embrace that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
How does that all kind of work its way out? I mean, at some point you said, okay, I think we want to get involved. I think we could say something.
I think that part, so it's two things. I think half of it is just deciding to do it.
Which is 99% of what everyone needs to do.
Exactly. So it's a little bit of a leap of faith in that way. And then I think the second part of it is pulling people in that have that shared vision with you. So one of the first sort of steps that we took when I ended up stepping into this presidency role was that I knew I was going to need a partner, an executive director that I could work very closely with, who had this sort of shared vision about taking the spotlight and taking it off of the NHTA and turning it back onto the membership or the participating companies. That was just, and however we did that, I didn't really know at the time, but I just knew that was going to be a very important change that we were going to have to make. And so who would be willing to kind of take that ride with me? So I put a job description together and I put it out there, and I ended up connecting with Brian Halpern.
Yes.
And that was probably the most important, I would say, first step in that direction, because Brian we had a lot of conversations leading up to my offering him the position, and he was totally on board. He was like, I agree with you. I have a lot of ideas of how we could do it. And he's such a creative person.
I know.
I think it's the director in him, but he really wanted to get his hands on the show in a real way. And he had a lot of ideas of how he could really expand the show, but also tighten it up a little bit, and really make it member focused. And I wanted us to have the opportunity to work together and to try to do that.
Yeah.
And I was just incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
Brian's also just a high bandwidth person.
He is. Yeah.
Right?
What a good choice of words.
He is.
Thank you.
Well, I don't often hear people described that way, but that's...
Yeah.
He's just, some people get busy and they get stressed out. And Brian gets busy and he just excels at 4 things instead of 1 thing.
Right. Yeah.
And he was someone who had this prior experience of founding one of the sort of fundamental theater companies now in New Hampshire, right?
Right, the
From
Winnipesaukee
storefront,
Playhouse,
right?
yeah.
And so it was providence,
Yeah, yeah.
to have someone that capable, not just talented, but capable at execution to be
And
available.
he's so generous with his time.
Yes.
And his ideas, and I really appreciated that about him. We had such a lovely working relationship together because we were always willing to be available to one another. And so what started out is this, very natural working relationship just ended up turning into a really lovely creative friendship. So it didn't always feel like work to us.
Yeah.
It was sort of like, oh, I have an idea about the show, let me call Brian. Right? And we could just talk about it. And I think this will sound corny because he'll probably listen to this, but so sorry, Brian. But I will say that probably one of the most special things about leading the organization for the time that I did was that friendship that I formed with Brian and Justin, and I formed with him and his family together. So
Yeah.
it's just something that we'll take away with us.
And he's not high maintenance. He doesn't need the limelight for it. He just, matter of fact, he would just rather just kind of put it out there, put the mechanics in, just put it out there, and then sit back and watch.
Well, I think that's part of why he was an ideal partner, is because we still want the NHTA to be that for theater in New Hampshire. We want it to be the catalyst or a vilifying agent, not the thing that gets discussed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So was he part of while it was still at Stockbridge, or did he come on board after it moved to the Capitol Center?
So his first year was our last year at the Stockbridge.
Okay.
And while he was focused on the show and working with the board on producing that show, I was spending a lot of time in discussion with Katie Collins and Steve Martin at the Capitol Center, because I was there's no lovely way to say this, but I was hell-bent to find a place for us that I felt would be more accessible to everybody in the state. And I couldn't think of a better place than the Capitol Center.
So it was more of a logistical thing about where it was, or was it also the size of the place? Or
I think there's something really strong to be said about being in the Capitol.
Yeah.
I think there's something really strong to be said about being further north. I think the show and the organization had a southern New Hampshire flavor that is great, but that didn't always mesh with the interests of all the companies. I think that going to Derry versus going to Concord, if you're coming from somewhere along the Vermont border,
Berlin,
It matters.
Yeah, North Conway,
right? And so, and there's also just something. There's something special about the Cap Center. It's next, right down the street from the Capitol. It's right on this main street that is so much has been invested in. That's sort of a pride of the state.
right? Well, I think now it's taken on a new persona too, because now it has that glitz feeling to it that night.
Sure.
It's what it's made for. Rolling out the carpet and
Yes.
everybody shows up, and it's not a school. You're not using like the school gym or the school auditorium.
Yeah, and the Stockbridge is a beautiful facility, and you could dress it up in a way, and there were a lot of function rooms, and there were things you could do. But it's there's something about the Capitol Center and the house that's attached to it. And,
Yeah.
that space.
It has its own energy. It drives just because of what it is and where it is and who it is. And
And one of the first things that we saw, Gina, the board had been skeptical for years about the financial possibility of being at the Cap Center, right? And Gina worked really hard with Steve and Katie, and they found something that works. And one of the things we noticed immediately when we started to plan the show in Concord was we were hearing from state reps who wanted to attend, and we're getting a letter from the governor to the winners, right?
Really?
And so it's sort of somehow the state felt like they could own it because it was in the Capitol.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
And so I think that it had this effect that I don't think we even expected.
No.
Which was I don't want to say legitimizing, but maybe a gravitas, or just
I was going to use the word legitimizing, but then I was like, oh, that's not.
It was already legitimate.
It was.
Well, I know.
But
Puts that what's that word?
Maybe
Imprimatur?
institutionalized.
Yeah.
Imprimatur.
Yeah.
Imprimatur.
Yeah. Are they still involved now? Is the state still kind of...
yes.
Yeah, so this year we had letters from both U.S. senators to each of
Really?
the winners that were presented on the stage.
Wow.
To each of the special award winners, let's say.
The special award winners, yeah.
And,
That was really special, just to give
yeah,
them that
that was
envelope.
wonderful.
They didn't
Yeah.
even know what was in it until they
Yeah.
opened it up, and that was exciting. I hope that was exciting for them. But
So
yeah.
can we go back a little bit more?
Sure,
Yes.
please.
Because
Yes.
there's so much here. It's
Yeah.
really rich, and we're probably not going to get it all in. But so you're still at the Stockbridge, and things are working now, and you've got a vision. You see something. You're in place to be able to do it. So your vision that you've got, now you're working in the background with Katie and the Capitol Center. What's going on? What are the obstacles that you have to overcome to get there? Or is it just an easy transition? You're like, okay, yeah, we'll just flip the switch and we're there.
I mean, no transition is easy. I haven't found, because change is always scary. And I think that it would have been, I don't want to say easy, but I think that if we had just decided to stay at the Stockbridge, or maybe not make big decisions that we thought were going to be, giant financial leaps for us, that there would have been, I think that folks on the board would have been okay with that. So I think it was a lot of sitting in meetings and really trying to, I don't want to say convince, but trying to get people to see a broader vision, and that it is possible. It just means that we have to take some chances.
Were you getting pushback during the process?
I wouldn't say
Or just-
pushback, but I would say just, there was a worry, and
Sure.
that's normal. That's
Yep.
completely
It was a
natural.
slow persuasion. I think
Yeah.
that the,
Yeah.
the change, things just like the change in the name, which are actually, I think it's pretty interesting.
Let's tackle that right now.
Sure.
What brought that about?
So
So that came about after a few years at the Capitol Center and having really successful shows there, and thinking about other ways that we could do more.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say that as like a blank statement. So now that we've kind of nailed down our home and we've made changes to the show that
we should talk about.
Okay.
That were well received.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed us, I think, an opportunity with the community where they had some trust in us now, that they were making decisions that they felt were smart decisions or good decisions, that we could maybe push a little bit more. And so part of that push was to think about what else we can do beyond the award show. And in order to do that, we needed to think about additional funding, because most of our funding comes from the ticket sales at the award show.
Yep.
And a few very generous sponsors.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Who I won't name, but we would be lost
Because
without them.
they want to remain anonymous, or you just don't want to name them?
I didn't ask their permission, I guess,
Okay,
to
okay,
say
fair
their
enough.
names. But yeah, we're just super generous sponsors, and so we're
I'll name our sponsors.
Yes.
So no, I think it's important actually. We have a tremendous primary sponsor over the last few years, Roadhouse and Sons, which is a novel and a comic book and a sort of art project.
It's a graphic
What?
novel.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And we've also received support over the years from New Hampshire Magazine. We've received support from the Hampton Inn and Concord in a major way, and now we're also receiving some help from the Hotel Concord on Main Street.
Oh, this is wonderful. Well, I had no idea that you were
Yeah.
back there. That's an excellent thing.
And so
That's really
it is
good.
worth mentioning. Each of those benefactors has helped us transition to where we are in Concord.
Yeah, Roadhouse and Sons is an incredible sponsor for us. We found them through a board member who is involved with that does marketing and PR for them. And
Mia Maravis, who is tremendous.
I don't know if I should be saying there. I don't want to.
I think we should. I mean, these are the people, right?
I own the scissors. You can call me.
So Mia, yes.
Mia's a board member. Mia is also has become a
Broadway
A Broadway producer.
What?
She's in New York a lot of the time now. And some people in your life, every new thing you learn about them, they become more mysterious but also amazing.
Yeah, like this right now. Yeah.
We we were having a conversation with Mia.
It's happening live.
One night about changes we might want to make to the process of adjudicating shows for the NHTA. She goes, how we do it for the Grammys? I mean, how we do it for the NHTA? Oh, yeah, I'm a voter for the Grammys. I go every year, and she might have one in her garage or something. She's just an...
And she's everywhere. Remember the night we went
We
to a
went.
show in Boston, and we walked in, and Mia was sitting right there.
Yeah.
I was like, Mia, what are you doing here?
Just an amazing person.
She's
Just
a-
Yeah.
she's
And we're
amazing,
lucky
yeah.
to have a lot of people involved in the organization who are just sort of sources of energy. And in a volunteer group, you need that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes someone will flag a little bit or just be stressed out when you have so many people who can step up and shower you with positive energy. So I don't mind.
And they bring a whole different perspective with them.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because if it wasn't someone like her, it'd all be kind of localish kind of thing, right? And so you can't see what's outside, what's potential,
It's a great
because they can
perspective.
bring it in.
There's this stone soup
Well-
aspect to this, right?
Yeah, we would be lost without her. I mean, she's just invested so much in the show. She
Incredible.
really shares the vision of it and really loves it, and we're just very lucky to know
But so
her.
if we're going to give Ray a narrative,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you get the show in your hands,
Yeah.
and this is one more year left at the Stockbridge. And so, how did the show change? What was
Yeah.
your?
Because this is what we wanted to get back to, right? You said the changes. It was what
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
important to talk about.
I think so.
So I think we just said very broadly when we first started talking that it was about pulling the focus away from the NHTA, so the people that were involved themselves, and giving the platform back to the companies that were participating.
Were you getting pushback from other companies saying that they weren't involved because of something? I mean,
I think that we just didn't allow opportunity or enough opportunity for groups to be represented that night on
Okay.
stage. And I think that was a mistake.
more groups or just more time per group? When you
Both.
say, okay.
Both. I think that the way that the show is structured, it didn't necessarily allow people who weren't, I would say, top nominees or winners to get any real recognition that evening.
Okay.
And I thought that there were probably ways that we could do that just to help highlight a more broad view
Yeah.
of what was happening in the state throughout the year. And that was really always the intention, right? Because there's so many wonderful things that are happening, and it doesn't mean that if your name isn't, if you're not a top nominee, you're not a winner, it doesn't mean that the work that you did wasn't important
Right.
or special in some way.
Right.
So we did this in a couple of ways. Brian really wanted to bring back, I guess at one time in the very beginning, before my time, there had been sort of a performance ensemble, which was a group of folks that were supposed to represent many different artists that work with many of the different companies that participate. And so Brian really wanted an opportunity to do that, but do it a little bit differently, and to create some original content for them, to allow an opportunity for artists who work primarily with certain groups to kind of come together and work together for the first time. And I was like, yes. I was like, brilliant, let's do that.
This is a sort of pan New Hampshire troupe.
Yeah. And it could be open to anybody. And then I said to Brian that one thing that was really important to me with the ensemble was that was great, and it should absolutely highlight different companies, but it also needed to highlight, there had to be a gender balance. That was really important to me. And there also had to be a nice age spectrum that was represented as well. So we had never really had, other than the children's groups that performed, kids on stage performing, and there was no reason that we couldn't have them in the ensemble, or we couldn't have them as hosts. First of all, they're adorable, so
Yeah,
why
I know.
wouldn't you want them on stage?
Of course. Because they steal the limelight, that's why.
And he was on board with that. He was very good in the audition process about making sure that there was a good gender balance, and also that all of the companies were represented as best they could. And then we also did that through hosts too. So one thing that I said to Brian was that I didn't want awards girls anymore. That just felt very archaic to me, and I didn't like it. And that I thought there was no reason why we couldn't have a large ensemble and then a cohort of hosts. And it could be however many he wanted, 6, 8, 10, whatever he needed. So it was really great because not everybody can sing and dance.
Yeah.
But even if you can't, you can still be on stage that night as a host. And I thought that was so special. So I really liked that. So those were a few important ways. Some other ways that we tried to highlight and show more was by adding photography into our presentation that evening. So a lot of groups are already doing an amazing job photographing what they're doing
Documenting their
and
work.
documenting their work.
Right.
And there was no reason why we couldn't have a process to collect that documentation and highlight it on stage that night.
One of the hardest things for me as a first-time attendee of the award show, and as someone who wasn't brought up in New Hampshire theater, was to hear someone's name read for a certain role at the New London Barn Playhouse or wherever. I had no idea what that meant.
Right.
I didn't know who that actor was. I didn't know what that venue was.
You had no hook.
I didn't know
Right.
what does it mean to have a show at the New London Barn Playhouse. And
Exactly.
so I think
And I think it was a mistake to and this is not me being judgmental using the word mistake, but I think it was a misstep to just assume that everybody in the audience knows who everybody is.
What's that insider feel, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because I have family that would love to come whenever I get nominated. Like, let us know, we want to go.
Yeah.
And the first year it happened, I'm like, well, you're not going to know anybody, and you're not going to. I had the very same perspective.
Right.
I was pushing them away. They wanted to come and enjoy the night, and I said, I don't think you're going to get it. You'll know me when I'm nominated, but other than that, you've never seen any of the plays. You don't know any of the groups. You don't know any of the people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had that same feeling. That's interesting.
This is a challenge for us, especially moving to Concord. We'd like to eventually build audience in a way that people go because it's a great night of theater in the winter in Concord. And maybe they don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they don't know any actors. They're
Yeah.
just, it's a night of song and dance that's fun and crazy.
Yes,
And,
yes.
You watch the Oscars even if you don't know
Correct.
who's on.
Right, or ever seen the movies.
You know it'll be a show. And so that was one of the goals with this.
Excellent.
With this photography thing, this was my, I think, first project with
Yeah.
with the NHTA was one of the things you learn when you make a suggestion to a volunteer organization. Say, okay, if you want to do it, right?
Hence, volunteer. Yeah, you could volunteer for your own idea.
It turns out to be an interesting logistical effort to corral media from all of the groups that are participating and to present it that day. It ends up being,
It's hard enough to get their ballots. Never mind there.
Yeah, and at first, a few companies got it, right? They're like, oh, you're going to project our work during the awards show, right? There are no big pictures on the script, right? But my actor's face will be on the screen. Yes, I want to do this. And I think some other groups just, I don't know, maybe I wasn't persuasive enough. But so the first time that we did it at the Stockbridge, I'd say maybe a third of the nominees, someone's face would appear. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a revelation for everyone in the room, especially for the companies who had the good fortune and had done good, the good work during the year to be shortlisted in the top 3, and then there wasn't a display. And so the first year that we came to Concord, the next year there was a flood of, right?
Because it was a different choice we were making, and I think that until you see it, you don't always understand it, right? And then when people saw it, they were like, oh, we want our pictures up. Yeah. We want that. I think once they saw that, we were going to take what they gave us and we were going to not only showcase it on awards night, but showcase it in a way that is beautiful and sophisticated and meaningful, and that they can trust us with what they send us. So that was really important.
I think that I've learned so much about venues, so I just want to see one of their productions now, just because of how gorgeous the imagery that they get from their shows. And I think that bit of education for the audience as the night goes on gets to the root a little bit more of what we're trying to do, which is cross-pollinate, drive audience, drive a desire to see theater.
Yeah, I think you accomplished it on one level because my wife's not a theater person. She actually has a disdain most of the time for theater people. It has something to do with egos, but anyway.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But that happened. When we went to the awards night at the Capitol Center, something happened, and she was like, "What? Where's that group? We should go up and see a show up there." What is it? I think it had the Weather Vane or something. Yes. Had won something. And she said, "Where are they located? We should go up there and see a show."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That just made me really happy.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to let you know that this is like the second point you've brought up, that a change you wanted to do that we've embraced as not outsiders, but
as an audience.
Yes, exactly.
I think one thing that is important to know, and I would like to note it, is that, when we talk about making changes, we're not doing it just to make a change. We're doing it with a lot of intent because we've thought a lot about it. Mm-hmm. And we feel quite strongly that there are changes that are really going to benefit the member companies, not because we just want to make a change. And so I think that as people have gotten to be more familiar with me and with Justin and who we are and some of the changes that the board has made, I think that it's been easier. It's been easier to...
Well, it's important to note that this has been a process every year.
Definitely.
Right? And there's nothing that we've done that we haven't talked about at open meetings, that we haven't socialized. And so I think that one of the neat things about the NHTA is that there is this desire to be sort of democratic, to be transparent, to say, we have an idea, we have an initiative, we have a thing that we think will be cool. What do you guys think, right? And we've been lucky that we've had a lot of support for the things that we thought were the most important changes. And I think with regards to sort of the name change and maybe some of the broader focus of the organization, another thing that I was shocked to learn after the first time I went to the Theater Awards was that there's this year-round adjudication thing that happens, right? And this was the first glimpse I got into maybe Maddie Gregg is a genius, a persuasive genius. I think I have no idea how I would drive around New Hampshire and convince companies to drive around New Hampshire and see other shows 6 times a year, right? Even if they're like a summer-focused organization, right? A summer stock, to go in the middle of winter to see a youth musical or something, and to spend hours writing about it. Right. And I couldn't believe that there's this process where everyone's driving around the state, seeing each other's work,
and then going off and like writing about it.
And then going off and writing about it. And so
we hope.
And so that every time I describe it, even still, it seems remarkable to me. Yeah. Right. I don't know of any communities like that. You know, you have things like the Tonys where everyone has to go see everything if you're part of the voting organization. But it seems more sort of grassroots and heartfelt in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire's spread out. If you go somewhere 2.5 hours away and over the mountains to see a show, you still have to get home. Right. It's 5 hours of driving.
That's why I don't see more shows in North Conway. I love what they do, but round trip, that's a day trip. You know. Easily.
And so through the education process, a lot of people see a lot of work they wouldn't normally see. Yeah. And it just struck me that's the golden nugget here, right? Like the show from year to year can change a lot. Mm-hmm. You might have a bad show, you might have a good show, but there's still this community. Like what's connecting it? It's this other thing. And so I think when we were talking about Gina committing to be president, we talked about like, well, is this like a yearly pageant or is this something more meaningful? And if it is something more meaningful, why not show that face publicly? If there's this year-round work, why call the organization after the name of the night of the awards night, right? And I think that process of working on the identity of the organization, it took years to really draw into focus.
Is this adjudication component, is this part of the changes that you wanted to get to earlier? Are there still more changes that were impactful that we want to cover before we get, because that's a huge component.
So the adjudication process was one of the fundamental initial parts of the NHTA. NHTA 1, the very first one, people went around and did this, right? And I was looking at the materials the other night. You know, Maddie had designed these incredible pamphlets and brochures. And it seems, I don't want to put words in Rick and Maddie's mouth, but it seems like at the time it was sort of conceived as a great cross-promotional effort, right? It has this sort of genius kind of PR sort of flavor to it. But I think what it's become is more sort of artists supporting artists, witnessing, you know, theater's ephemeral. Mm-hmm. If you put on a show and nobody sees it, or you put on a show and somebody sees it, there's a difference in that impact. So just going and seeing each other's work has a lot of meaning. And so, you know, we were bandying about, well, if you don't call it the Theater Awards, what do you call it? No one's going to like this. No one's going to want to do this. It's a Theater Awards. It's like City Alliance has a good benefit of starting with A. But the more you think about it, it really is what it is, right?
And that, I was going to touch upon that, like the whole NHTA, because nobody ever called it like the New Hampshire Theater Awards. It always just said NHTA for short. And one of the things that Rick kind of like imparted on me before he resigned off the board, was that that is a part of like our DNA. And that you can't change the organization's DNA. You can build on it and you can expand it, but you can't take the identity away from it. And I never wanted to do that, but he was right, you know, that if you just change the name, then you lose a bit of who you were, in a sense, or you lose that familiarity that you've built up.
It's like a little piece of history that drops off.
Exactly. And he was 100% right about that. So when I remember coming back home after a board meeting and talking with Justin about that, I was like, you know, Rick is right about this. And I'm just, you know, it had me sort of second guessing, like, what would we call it? And Justin was like, well, it's an alliance. And he's like, and then you could still keep NHTA. And I was like, brilliant.
It's just like very intentional, but it makes all the difference, right? If we're applying for a grant and we're going to describe what we are, right? We're a statewide arts advocacy organization is what we are. If our name on our grant application is, referred basically to an awards night, that's difficult. But if we can describe our name in a way that describes, a movement rather than an evening's entertainment, then that has value.
Can you repeat again what you said? You said you are, what was the term you used? You're a theater...
I think I would most succinctly describe the New Hampshire Theater Alliance as a statewide arts advocacy organization.
Advocacy.
For the theatrical arts in New Hampshire.
Because that's big, too. Because that shifts the focus. Yes. That's a huge shift in focus.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's a word.
Yes.
And it's really being honest with ourselves about the work we're doing, and then being open-minded to, okay, what does that mean right now that we...
So you're shifting from a host, kind of, to something that's more... An advocacy group is somebody who's pushing for or alongside of an organization or a group or a person. So you have now morphed into something greater than just an evening's event.
And it always was, right? There was always this
I guess, because I wouldn't know, right? I just see the night.
This undercurrent of adjudication.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't know because we didn't focus on it.
Yeah, well, I didn't have to know. I mean, as a participant, as an audience member, why do I care, you know?
But as an organization, we didn't really talk about it or highlight it in any way.
One of the changes that we made to the show was to talk about adjudication during the show in a way that is hopefully not boring, but to simply say, you know, this year there were over 100 adjudicators who filed over 350 ballots. Each ballot represents a night's drive to a different town to see something that might not be aligned with your aesthetic interest, but you do it. And so, you know, this is a large operation happening year-round of people supporting each other's work. And everyone in the audience who has been a part of this stand, and a third of the audience stands, you know, it's 90 seconds of the show.
I hadn't thought of that. A third of the audience stands, because there's like 800 people go, 900 people.
Yeah, there's about 800 people that go every year.
And there's how many adjudicators?
Well, so a third.
300?
A fifth. I mean,
well, it's
there's
okay.
about 120 adjudicators.
That's a lot of people.
So, you know,
a lot of volunteers.
It has a visual effect that,
sure it does.
That I think has meaning. And so that little moment has become one of the sort of chestnuts of the show, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's great. It's great to have them stand up, for people to have an opportunity to see who, you know, you might know who your friends are that are adjudicating, but you might not know everybody. And it's just fun to be able to give them that moment.
Well, they're the unsung heroes. They're the people who don't get recognition. They make the show work.
Yes.
Without them, there are no.
Yes.
There's no first, second, or third, or
there's no anything.
Top 10. Right.
And they haven't always had the recognition that they've deserved. And so I think, again, like, it's just another opportunity to, like, shine the light back on, you know, the members and the people that are doing the work, and the liaisons and the adjudicators. And it's just important, and I'm just glad it's happening.
So you've gone from an event night, now you're an advocate for the state, for all of the groups in the state. Is that your position?
Yes.
Well, that's the end of part 1 of my talk with Gina and Justin. Stay tuned for part 2, where we find out what being an advocacy group means and what the future of the NHTA looks like. I'm Ray Dudley, and this has been a Square Peg production. To find out more information about all that we do, you can find us on Facebook or at www.squarepegnh.com.